Welcome back to another Seek of Psychology. Today we're going to talk about burnout in sport. So burnout is something a lot of you are probably very familiar with. You'll see like a very sharp decline in an elite athlete, or you might see a kind of flash in the pan prodigy. You could probably name 5 or 6 athletes that come to mind immediately when you hear the name or the term burnout. We're not going to name any today, but we're just going to talk mainly about like how to spot burnout, what burnout is agreed to be in the literature, and then we're just going to talk about some papers that have kind of looked into burnout in a small bit more detail. There's a really good paper by Goodger et al. 2007. It's called Burnout in Sport, a Systematic Review. To be honest, if you're looking into burnout, that's probably where I'd go if you wanted more details. This is where a lot of the information from this video is coming from. Right, so what is burnout? Well, in a sporting context, burnout tends to be a withdrawal from sport, usually surrounded by some sort of resentment of the sport, usually surrounded by some sort of decrement in performance, and it tends to have a kind of multifactorial piece to it. So it's not just that you're physically burned out, it's not just that you're emotionally burned out, or that you're having a fight with somebody else. It's usually kind of a host of factors coming together, and you usually find there's around 3 or 4 different factors playing into burnout. Most of the stuff we see on burnout originally came from burnout in the workplace. So prior to any of the burnout in sport studies or even the intervention-based stuff, what you started seeing was burnout with people overworking. So commonly overworking in an office environment, but also overworking in kind of physical environments or highly stressful environments, like people who have deadlines to meet, people who are in an adverse working environment, such as a soldier at war. And then what you'd often find is a lot of these people would have a sudden noted decrement in performance that wasn't due to a physical overexertion per se or an emotional overexertion per se. It was just a host of factors adding into this kind of eventual bang being a burnout. Originally, when they started looking at burnout, they started looking at kind of 3 pillars. So the 3 pillars were like emotional exhaustion, a depersonalization or devaluation pillar, and then the last one was a decrement in performance. So basically, if you had an employee and they started being kind of less involved with the people around them or started to withdraw from the people around them, they started to have kind of more emotional outbursts. So it might be less likelihood of dealing with other people well. They mightn't deal with certain interactions well. They mightn't be able to interact with people in the same way they were interacting with them. And then the third piece, of course, would be like they're less able or less effective at doing their job. When you apply this kind of workplace model into sports, it often doesn't work quite well. And burnout is definitely one of these cases where you can't just take burnout in the workplace, apply it to an athlete, and it works. In the case of an athlete, because most sports are very, very kind of physically demanding, the physical nature of burnout comes in an awful lot more. The issue, of course, with the physical nature of burnout is that it tends to weigh in on all the other aspects quite heavily. So if you have somebody who's overtrained, they're an awful lot less likely to be good around other people. They're an awful lot less likely to have high levels of performance with whatever task they're carrying out. So it's just a kind of understanding back in the 70s or 80s had to be slightly altered for when you're bringing this into an athletic population, that the physical aspect of burnout is just as important as the kind of emotional or psychological aspect. What this led to then was still 3 pillars, but being named in slightly different ways. So you have physical and emotional exhaustion is the first piece. So these are people or players or athletes who are just completely worn down. You'll see it in their face. You'll see it in their performance. They won't be able to lift as much. They won't be able to run as fast. They won't be able to jump as high. The second piece then will be a reduced sense of accomplishment. So you'll often find with athletes who are about to burn out or who are burning out currently is that their skills and ability aren't up to either their level of accomplishment, so what they've been achieving in the past, or what they feel like they need to be accomplishing right now. The issue with athletes is a lot of the time when you get an athlete at a certain level, they tend to be a very high performer and things would have tended to come easier for them in the past. So if you take somebody who is very, very effective as a powerlifter or a weightlifter, they're used to being able to put 5, 10, 15, 20 kilos onto their total or onto a specific lift. What you'll often find is in times of burnout, because they're not able to add kilos to their total, centimeters to the height of their jump, whatever it is, they'll get this kind of lack of accomplishment. So they're used to having very high levels of efficacy followed with very high levels of self-accomplishment, or how they feel about their accomplishments. When those performance markers start to decrease, their level of accomplishment, or how accomplished they feel, tend to decrease as well. The third aspect then with this proposed model was that you'd have a devaluation. So devaluation in sport is like the classic case of an athlete just not caring. I don't care about going to training. I don't care about competing. I don't care about winning. I don't care about recovery work. This is very, very often one of the first signs. If a coach isn't used to dealing with kind of burnout or seeing athletes in a burnt out state, the I don't care is usually one of the first kind of red flags. If we're looking for a more up-to-date or an easier model to follow, if you're an athlete who thinks they might be getting burned out, or their training partner might, or a coach who's worried about their athletes getting burned out, you should look at a model devised by Schofelli and Bunk in 2003. It's basically a 5-pillar model that you're going to be able to use for athletes, and you're going to be able to use it quite easily. So the 5 aspects are affective, cognitive, physical, behavioral, and motivational. So what these 5 different aspects do is they kind of encompass everything that could be happening if an athlete's getting burned out, and they start to kind of pinpoint different areas you might start to look into. So affective being the first one. So affective obviously is dealing with the emotions of the athlete or the emotions of the individual. If you start seeing the individual in like periods of a depressive mood, they might have tearful bursts, they might not be able to control their emotions quite well. This could be a sign that affectively they're being burned out. The cognitive aspect then of burnout, we tend to think of athletes being constantly of a single level of cognition, right? If an athlete is a smart athlete, they're usually able to make 9 out of 10 decisions correctly. You expect them to show up to training on 4 of their 5 training days every week and make that 90% success rate. Well, that doesn't happen if an athlete is starting to get cognitively burned out. So you'll start seeing is like impaired judgment. They won't be able to remember calls. They might be highly cynical. So like levels of cynicism would really, really be elevated during burnout. They could also have like a feeling of helplessness. Physical exhaustion then is something probably most of you, when you clicked on this video, would associate with burnout. What physical exhaustion can be tracked by is if you use real-time markers of fatigue. So you could use a vertical jump on a jump mat. You could use 1 RM lifts or 3 RM lifts. You could also use something like a self-completion questionnaire where people fill in how fatigued they're feeling. Behavioral then is the second last aspect of this model. So behavioral will look for like absenteeism. So if someone isn't showing up, also look for like how they behave around others. So if someone usually meshes well with others and their coaches, behaviorally they might start to sway from the norm. This could be another sign that they're starting to get burned out. The last thing then is motivational. So motivational is usually the thing we will point to kind of second after their physical decrement. If somebody is no longer motivated, they don't care, they're kind of disillusioned with what they're going to achieve with the sport, this could definitely be one of the ones that will pop up first or second if you're talking to the athlete, that they don't have any goal set, that they don't have any direction with where they're going. So it really is a kind of easy marker to see. What we're going to talk about in the coming weeks is how to deal with burnout. So how to slowly withdraw someone from training and kind of replenish their resources. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you could comment down below, it would really help us for the algorithm. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.